right. Welcome, folks, for part two or maybe part three of our new symposium on saving the Republic. A lot of people thought that this conversation was not even worth having just a couple of years ago, when after, what is it, 60 years of imperial decay and rot, I had thought for many years that there wasn't even any chance that anything viable could still be existent or alive and within the beleaguered U.S. Republic. But we've seen sparks of life, some big sparks that have actually turned into fire. And I don't want to use any ill-choice words there, but but there's definitely a mixture. It's not a question of anything being untainted by evil. There's a mixture of things, and there's definitely a desire to survive, and certain historic traditions that have been latent and forgotten have, to a certain degree, an important degree, come alive in a way that I think the oligarchy is very unhappy with. And there's a fight over who's going to shape the terms and conditions of the oncoming policy from Trump 2.0. And the hunger for people to learn about this deeper American history, I'm noticing, is really strong right now. And that's why we decided to launch this series of classes over the coming 2 months, dealing with unveiling what has been hidden as far as the deeper, better traditions of America. What was the American system of political economy, going back to even before the American Revolution itself? And hence the first lecture that we had with Uwe Alschner, going through the battles of Gottfried Leibniz, the great scientist statesman who created a revolution in science and statecraft, advised Tsar Peter the Great, ushered in an age of a Renaissance movement inside of Russia at the same time as he was interfacing with leading figures around John Winthrop Jr., and who were establishing an idea of a new type of system of government based upon the rejection of hereditary power by an inner elite, and instead based upon the idea that all men are created equal, made in the image of a living, loving, reasonable creator. This is the exact thing that gave rise a century later to the successes of the American Revolution. Like Benjamin Franklin were directly heirs to this tradition of science and statecraft. Sam Labriere's class last week, for those who haven't seen it, is going to be in the description box as well, going through the broad history, the sweep of the American system of political economy, in all of its integrity, and all of those American presidents who got shot and died and poisoned while in office, fighting to revive it to varying degrees. It was a brilliant class. And today I'm very happy that Mel agreed, being one of the most ardent patriots that I know, who's just published a wonderful book called Americans Anonymous, to go through some of the content, both within her book, her thesis, and her entire raison d'etre in life, to just carry on this story a little bit further. And like usual, after Mel's formal remarks are finished, we'll open up for a Q&A with the audience. And I ask everybody to keep it a bit orderly, to either write your question down in the chat box and I'll read it, or if you want to pose it, that's even better. Just make your question as sort of condensed and economical as possible, because we might have a long list. And we'll go about it that way. So, Mel, thank you so much. It's all yours.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. And I'm really honored to be here with such brilliant people that have really been focusing on solutions, which is obviously why I wrote Americans Anonymous. It's basically a 12-step program for a country that is completely demoralized, dehumanized, uninterested in participating. And I really was influenced a lot reading Hannah Arendt's Between Past and Future. And what we're in right now is kind of this gap that she talks about in that book. You know, I think Kafka too, and in the trial or whatever, we're being pushed from two sides, and not enough people are in the gap, I think, as she said, able to act or really think right now because of the I think, egregious cognitive warfare we have been under assault from for now decades. And my whole hope, because I never intended for this to be something that I did with my life, traveling around the country. I've been to 300 speaking engagements, usually with small groups all over America, kind of saying, you know, we have this Constitution, we have this Bill of Rights. I understand everyone's talking about, you know, Trump says often, they're not after me, they're after you, and I'm in the way. But I say they're not after America, they're after the world. And the Constitution of the United States and the Bill of Rights and the people that believe that that is the law of this land and should be liberty and freedom and privacy and all this stuff, unalienable rights, should be for every man, not just in America, or anyone born on this planet. And right now, we have a lot of the public-private partnership, oligarchy, and tech people that are fully, I think, invested in a technocracy, which is the end outcome, in my opinion, of the goals of Agenda 2030, to make this planet more efficient, because us humans can't really do it, but they can somehow, is where we are. But I think it's time for normal people that have thoughts about and solutions about the future to rise up and make their voices heard, not just some, arbitrary elite that has come out of the breeding grounds of the poison Ivy League underbelly, to continue down the path of the new American century, which has completely failed. And so my whole goal is to empower people with information to empower themselves, to realize that they do still matter, and they do still have a voice and a vote and all of that. But if they're not willing to get invested and become part of the solution in their own backyards, because I fully believe that DC is not salvageable. I think beyond the sickening level of money laundering that goes through the 5 boroughs surrounding Washington, D.C., we can see that the games in Washington, D.C. since 1963 have only escalated to a deeper and deeper level of protection over the people, I believe, that have worked endlessly to destroy the republic that is the United States. And what I'm hoping is that people feel some kind of, that Trump didn't win in the traditional sense, that we the people won. But if we the people don't act like we won and are waiting for politicians, especially local ones that were infiltrated decades ago, to do it, and we're not citizen oversight boards in our own communities, in our own areas, if we're not investing in our county where we actually have power to push positive change in a better direction, and certainly our states, then again, it's our fault, which is why I wrote Americans Anonymous. As somebody that went through recovery 25 years ago, I thought in my head, America has hit rock bottom. We, the people, have a country that is completely unmanageable, and it's ruining our quality of life on such a massive scale here and around the world. But if we continue to be observers rather than founders. I keep repeating to people, America is not even 250 years old. It's a grand experiment of basically European origins, but origins from all over the world. And we can still consider ourselves founders. They're not going to look back on the history of America and think like, oh, only those first people. Like, we are in the gap right now where ordinary people that weren't involved in politics, but in arts and culture and anything, have an opportunity, I think, to become anything they want right now, because all hands are needed on deck to push a future that I think would be a better direction, not just for America and the world. But we kind of have to leave the past where it is, learn from its mistakes, and construct a future as founders of the future that we want our children and our grandchildren and future generations to be proud of. So I think that's where we are right now in my mind. And I think that there's a lot of work to do. And there's extraordinary people like the people on this call and people all over the world that have excellent ideas for changing the status quo of planet Earth, or what I call the parent company that's running planet Earth, and take it back into our own hands. It's going to take a lot of courage and a lot of mental fortitude, because I do believe that we have been under Michael Aquino, the Satanist that ran the psychology of the U.S. military back in the 60s and wrote Mind Wars. I think we are way past Mind Wars, and the cognitive warfare, especially on social media and intelligence-based television, has really, really done major damage. And then the whole shift to consumerism and I want what they have being totally normalized in entertainment and culture as well. People aren't stopping to think about who they are, and what they individually want, and how they can be a part and in the planning of the future. And that's pretty much where I am. I'm writing about right now for this week about that Hannah Arendt book, because it's like my book. It's exercises. Americans Anonymous goes through a 12-step program, literally taken from a 12-step program, where I identify the addiction in America to be conflict and chaos. And that addiction has dealers, and it has, suppliers, and it has kingpins, and it has this. And we're watching them all, do that. Well, I think the rest of the world is thinking, where are the American people? And my hope is that the American people start to say, I'm right here, and this is what I'm going to do on a massive scale.
Thank you, Mel. Hey, Mel, quick, before we go into the Q&A, can you take people through like a little gist of your thesis of the 12 steps? Like, what are those 12 steps that you outline in your book, and like how did you formulate that thesis?
Yeah, sure. So I started out, my first three chapters are about basically the founding fathers during the years of the Federalist Papers and all the different forms of governance that they were looking at for this new nation that they were building. And reading the Federalist Papers, I really got obsessed with the idea that individual liberty can never be forsaken, that liberty. And I realized a lot of people don't even know what liberty is or what it means. I think a lot of people don't know what freedom means. I think too many people haven't read the 27 grievances of the Declaration of Independence and realize we're still there. So for me, it really became that. And then when I was driving around the country, I'm not somebody who believes in left and right or Republican and Democrat. I think it's all BS to not see the parent company that's actually running this country and the world, as I call them. And so Rob and I we were locked down in Manhattan, and we drove all over America, anywhere people would listen to me speak about the tentacles of the UN, all the way up through the banking cartel and really who's running things, while we don't have our eyes focused on the real enemy and just are focusing on each other as per color revolution. And everyone I talked to basically in, 30 different states, and we would drive, we would stop, we would find out where the people in the community went to hang out. I didn't want to go to the best restaurant. I didn't want to go to the most expensive restaurant. I wanted to go where the people that live in that community and work in that community go to unwind themselves. And I did this everywhere I could. And what I saw was that people just felt demoralized. They felt like America was over. They don't even want to talk about anything. They don't care. They're not taking what's happening to America, and more importantly, the entire world, humanity in general, personally, because they don't even know that they should or that they can. And this learned helplessness and powerlessness over decades has really taken its toll on the people of this country. And I think most people have just given up. They see this bureaucracy, they see the billions of dollars that have to go into local elections. I mean, and all of this, they know that the country's been bought from underneath us. And I said, no, this isn't right. For now, thank God, I think if Kamala won, that this would not be the case. But for now, we the people still have the Constitution and the Bill of Rights as a framework for turning around a lot of things in this country. And for me, I just felt like the country had hit rock bottom. I knew how that felt in my early 20s in Hollywood. And I recalled walking into, after a lot of pushing, into a church in a basement in West Hollywood, thinking, what am I doing here? And walking through the door and saying, oh my God, I'm in a room full of people that all know something is very wrong and that it's them. And that they also know that that they need the fellowship and a higher power and a plan, because they don't want to live that way anymore. And everyone in there knew that they were both the problem in their life and the solution. Well, I think right now, everyone in America basically knows that, or I hope they know, that we the people are the problem and we're also the solution. And that's how I wrote it, which is basically I go through the whole 12 steps in the guise of that Americans are addicted to conflict and chaos by design. And I go through a lot of exercises. I have one friend, my best friend basically, is one of the only survivors of MK Ultra mind control that was sold to the CIA at 3 years old. Didn't get rescued till she was 30, and then worked with a nemesis of Colonel Aquino, who was one of the people that tortured her, to kind of unravel her mind. It's the only really high-level like military level, I think, intelligence unraveling of cognitive warfare level military grade mind control, which I believe has been tailored and manipulated over decades to go into everyone's room, on everyone's phone. I certainly know from the NATO documents, cognitive warfare documents, that they have infiltrated all social media, all media of every kind, to not allow anyone to really think beyond what they prescribe as the narrative. And I think that that narrative has to be broken. And I see it very similar to, somebody getting out of, recovery, going back home, walking into, their house, and the family sitting around having wine and wondering if they want to go down to the local bar to hang out with their old friends. Like, that you can't do that. And, there's a saying in recovery, what do we have to, what do I have to change? And it's kind of like everything, and mostly your mind. So I'm just very concerned about the level of mind control that has swallowed up much of the American people's psyche, and replaced it with, I often say they replaced the 10 Commandments with the 7 deadly sins, but in a lot of ways, when you look around us, that does seem to be the case. And I think it's all by design. So that is why I picked this path, because I think the American people themselves, organizing themselves around liberty, privacy, freedom, protecting our data, this surveillance nonsense. I think only by joining together in the so-called Americans Anonymous groups, or as Derek Burroughs calls them, freedom cells in our communities, can we push back. We need to be the oversight of the government. We need to look at every tax dollar or no-bid contract or NGO that's, under the shadows of our area and swallowing up our freedom, our money, our time, our effort, our energy, our communities. It's really that deep. But, a few solid people in every jurisdiction of, what are there, 3,500 whatever counties. If we had these good groups that weren't about left and right, Republican and Democrat, and were about freedom, liberty, unalienable rights, and protecting what we have in the sense of those things, we would get a lot farther and have much better quality people in our government going forward, because they would know that we were holding them accountable. Nobody has held anyone accountable within the government since the murder of JFK, as far as I'm concerned, that really deserved it. And until there's accountability, I don't think we can all really comfortably move forward. But I want people to know accountability starts in your backyard, because they will all attach to the same blob, this globalist funded NGO network, public-private partnership, all of this. It all connects at the top. So if we start pulling out the roots where we live in our own swamp behind us, real change, I think, can really happen ahead. And that's what it's about.
That's why I like you so much, Mel. I mean, there's so many people I encounter who they want action now, but and that's not a bad thing. That's a good thing. But they do it at the expense of their development of their mind and the self-examination required to be able to identify how we got into this problem to begin with, because it's part of this is subjective. There are these evil forces, satanic things it's terrible. It's terrible. But at the same time, people become a little bit too victimized by that idea of we're enslaved by this bad thing, and there's like no free will. It becomes a very predeterministic loser philosophy and worldview. Then if you realize, no, the reason why this has been permitted has been through certain faults that we've permitted into our culture that's infested all of us subjectively, that we can then introspect on, deal with, and then when we do take action, it's going to be much less inclined to blow up in our face. We won't be inclined to follow Pied Pipers or have infiltrators that will, say that all of the right words that we want to hear, but that will thus lead us over the cliff because we forgot to appreciate something that the enemy understands about how to manipulate dumb people who mean well into their own self-destruction. So I really appreciate that approach. And that I think sets the stage for the first question by Monty. Monty in Mexico. There you are. Hey.
Yeah, thank you very much. And Mel, really, I follow your work closely. Just like with Matt, you're a prolific writer, and your video presentations have a tough time keeping up with you, but my appreciation for your being here today.
Thank you.
Yeah. My question, though, I'm a Vietnam vet. I was in Vietnam in '68, the year of the Tet Offensive. And Steve Bannon just made a comment about this war on Trump, which I took to heart. He warned Trump not to get caught in the trap that Nixon got caught into with Vietnam by escalating it, getting involved, and now he owned it with that failure. And in my opinion, Nixon was Watergated deliberately and lied to by the CIA in relationship to the situation on the ground in Vietnam, which caused him to escalate. Just as Trump is also being outright lied to by the present CIA. Larry Johnson and Ray McGovern pointed this out. In other words, for instance, Trump is going along with this line that there was 1 million Russian KIAs in Ukraine, that Russia is failing with its economy and so forth, which is very much embarrassing. He also made other statements which are kind of out there, but I think that Nixon, like Trump, I think one of the reasons they may have gone after him is he wanted detente with Russia and China, just as Trump does. And also he was inquiring into the Bay of Pigs and so forth. So I think Richard Helms, the CIA, set Nixon up, also went after him, and that's what we're facing today insofar as the present Five Eyes intelligence operations. Would you comment on that, please?
Yeah. First of all, am I on? Okay. Yeah. First of all, I 100% agree with you that that is what's going on. The military-industrial complex, as warned by Eisenhower, is way worse than I think Eisenhower even imagined it could and would be. And this is where we are right now, which is dangerous because in my work, what I see is that the technocracy people from the 30s, of course, but certainly forward. And now we have this global tech group of oligarch billionaires that are stepping up with solutions to our problems. Certainly the World Economic Forum has been doing it for years, but bringing Larry Ellison and Sam Altman onto the stage of the White House and announcing something that the American people didn't have a say on, didn't vote on, and isn't even being questioned, and they want this full steam ahead. And I think there's a lot of players that have been working for many, many years on this global project, Agenda 2030, top down, in my opinion, technocracy, totalitarianism. Because when I look at China, I think China is not a communist country. I think it's a technocracy, in my mind, from what I've looked at. And technocracy, in my opinion, is more dangerous because it is the making humanity and planet Earth efficient because the humans do not do such a good job, but technology certainly can. I will never understand why Brzezinski had the power he did all the way through Obama, but it seems that that was his endgame with the CIA. And I think we have to also look at the idea that the CIA and the State Department appears right now to me to be a public-private partnership that is globalized, that doesn't, the concerns of the American people, let alone people in the rest of the world, are not even considered, I don't think, when it comes to this unholy relationship, especially with Blinken and Sullivan in there, with the rest of the world, where these people, I believe, in all the way back in Rio in the 90s, but certainly in Obama's term when he signed on to Agenda 2030 in 2015, I think this group of globalist billionaire oligarchs, which include a lot of these tech titans in America, and I describe this, a lot of people want to say it's China, it's Russia, it's America. I really, what I see on the global level is that there's a group of self-anointed people that believe that they are the chairman of the boards of the of the world, kind of functioning like a parent company, up there with the BIS and the IMF and the World Bank, and then all their tentacles of the UN and all of that under it. And somewhere under there, under their regional control, are the nation states that are just the nuisance on planet Earth, and that they are trying to figure out how to get us all onto a digital public infrastructure, which includes a lot of energy and fossil fuels and natural resources and all of that. And I do wish that somebody, it might be happening, it's very hard to read what's going on. I do have contacts in the very inner circle of the Trump world. But when it comes to this, I don't see the plans for the technocracy and the total digital track and trace surveillance world that was proposed with the Great Reset and the Fourth Industrial Revolution as different. I think they're the same. And that will need humanity to also understand that it's the same. But here we are again, being talked into joining the global public infrastructure, but as the leaders. And to me, this is a disappointing thing. I really wish we could just go back to George Washington's farewell address and start, listening to some of the advice on the way out of the gate in the beginning. But I don't think the American people are quite aware of the fact that the people that funded and built the technocracy, technology, track and trace surveillance, social credit score system in China, after I followed the money on that, I believe are building that in China and testing it there, and would prefer to have that in the whole world, and that they would control it from, their perch wherever it is in Brussels or, DC or New York or the city of London or wherever else. They still want the same thing they've always wanted, which is top-down control of humanity in the hands of a small group of people. And they're presenting it as technology that's going to improve our lives when I see it as the opposite. So again, how this goes back to Nixon and Johnson and Vietnam and all of that. How do you keep funding this global public infrastructure and getting all of these natural resources to, we don't even have close to the energy to run this global public infrastructure that Gates and the UN and all the World Economic Forum partners all invested in. It's not even ready for prime time. Yet there's trillions of dollars invested in the outcome of achieving the 17 development goals. And nobody on planet Earth that is a person voted for this. And nobody said, like, okay, this is what we're going to do. And then you bring in, like you said, first of all, the Unconstitutional Patriot Act is the only reason we're here, in my opinion, and it needs to be looked at. But the intelligence blob that came out of the Unconstitutional Patriot Act, I believe to be a fully created CIA public-private partnership, State Department collaboration with what I call the World Parent Company, a group of, it appears to me, billionaires and trillionaires that have no allegiance or alliance to any country, any people, any flag, any religion, anything. They have their technocracy plan. It's working great in China, if you ask Klaus Schwab, great, all the way back to Roosevelt. Not Roosevelt, Rockefeller. And frankly, I think the American people and the rest of the world have to realize that model in China is the model for Agenda 2030 and the achievement of the 17 development goals. And I, for one, am going to stand in the way. And that's my issue right now, seeing this with Trump, is he's not talking to we the people about what we want in terms of this digital infrastructure. Because, it's weird. I went out the other night and I went somewhere and I said, it was just to a local restaurant where I live, and I was talking to somebody and I said, I'm a little bothered when I see Larry Ellison talk about, behavior control, and we're going to be surveilled all the time. And when he says we, I'm like, who are we? Like, you're saying, is that you? And this guy went nuts. Very wealthy guy, probably lives on Palm Beach Island, just like as if he was in a cult that Ellison runs. We were all like laughing. I'm with Robbie, 60. I'm nearing 50. We're like with good people, and we're like, why is this grown man in his 70s, who's obviously a multimillionaire, almost in tears because I questioned Larry Ellison being at the White House. So for me, I think that's the most, rather than it being pushing us towards war with Iran or Russia or anything else. I think the war is to fund the digital global infrastructure more than anything else, capture the natural resources everywhere that whoever that Larry Ellison and his friends are talking about can get, and then to get everyone on board and have the American people walk in eyes wide open, because that's the next phase we're told is supposed to be coming. Even if you look at that propaganda movie that Obama made on Netflix, he's telling you right there, we're going to control everything and we can turn it on and off at will, just like the guy from the Bank of International Settlements. And I like that Trump said he's not going to do a CBDC with the Bank of International Settlements and the central banks they run, but that doesn't mean that he's not doing one that will infringe on the Constitution. So for me at this point, it's going to take people to admit what you said about Vietnam and understand the entire psychological operation of that, and also how the troops that came home were treated as part of that psychological operation, and say, are we going to go through that again? I mean, and I think that it's more Vietnam vets and more vets of Iraq and of all the should have be elevated your voices to a place, because I've spoken in front of more vets than any other groups in this country, and they are very invested in care. I've gone to many. My father's 86; he's still in his local American Legion, and a lot of vets do fully understand what we're facing right now, and you know, I wish and I hope that on my show, they had more of a say, because I also know that it's very devastating to a lot of my veteran friends, the mockery of which they have created of the U.S. military in the meantime. So I don't know if that answers what you're saying, but I think our danger right now is not walking forward into something like Vietnam, but the one that we're walking forward into, which I believe to be technocracy, you don't get out. And that's my fear. Once we accept the idea of full track and trace surveillance, not just here, but around the world, and that they can all share it, we have to look at who's controlling the algorithms and who's collecting the data and for what purposes. And until there's transparency in that, I think the people have to say, no, we need a whole lot of transparency before we're going to accept this top-down global public infrastructure of any kind, let alone allow it in America.
Yeah, well, thank you for that. You know, there were two signs of hope that I saw recently. Trump did come out and say that Ukraine should have accepted the Istanbul agreements.
Yes.
And just the day before, Putin came out and said that the 2020 election was stolen by the Democratic Party. And in his opinion, there wouldn't have been a Ukraine war if Trump had taken office. But my concern...
One sec, I want to say something, which I believe Putin knew all this time. I think Putin's known the entire time about the theft of the 2020 election. That's a good point. Yep, sorry.
Yeah. I agree with that. But my concern, getting back to my original question, my concern is the CIA is lying to Trump. And he's perpetuating that lie. So my concern is, does he know it's a lie and he's just doing kabuki theater, or is he buying into this lie and not being aware of the fact that he's completely misinformed insofar as the actual situation on the ground in Ukraine? Because if he's trying to go into talks with Putin under the assumption he can bamboozle him over this thing, I think that's the greatest threat we're facing right now.
Yeah, I agree with that. But I do like Radcliffe, and I do think that I think one of the big things we have to remember is in the relationship with Russia, and many people might not care anymore about this, but the whole Russiagate hoax we often look at in terms of Donald Trump. I think people should be looking at it in terms of Russia as well. And I think tremendous amount of damage was caused all the way from that point forward, which I wasn't surprised that Putin said that. But I happen to believe that the war in Ukraine is going to be de-escalated by détente very soon. And I think one first step is that Putin is saying what his terms are, and Trump's kind of not yet. So I want to give it a wait and see. Also, the DNI, and now we have DHS head in there, we have Hegseth in there. Regardless of what people think, at least things will be opened, and we can start to look at that. And I think some of the declassification that's coming beyond what he has also already asked for will be very eye-opening. But again, I go back to, if the American people don't take this knowledge and use it as fuel to get involved in recreating this country the way that we would like it to be, then even getting that knowledge isn't going to help us. But I really do think that there's been long-term plans to end these wars, even though the escalation sounds like it's rising. I pray for that, and I think that what I heard is that the CIA is also going to be, I mean, from what I hear, is going to be audited and they're going to look into a lot of things like USAID and National Endowment for Democracy and what happened in 2014, which is why they put the pardons back to 2014 in Ukraine, and what is happening now. I think that there is going to be a sober conversation about what happened in Ukraine, starting when Russia fell, or USSR fell, and forward. And if we do it that way, there really is no reason to continue the war until we clean up what has been going on there, because frankly, it appears to me that a lot of people that are in bed with the oligarchs that have one foot in Russia and one foot in Ukraine and are living in Miami don't really care about about the people there. But I honestly do think Donald Trump does care, and about the human lives that have been sacrificed for no reason, really. And I understand the whole NATO thing, but I'm of the feeling that NATO should have gone away a long time ago. So. But I do think you're right. But I think Trump's going to surprise everyone when it comes to keeping his commitment not to escalate or start new wars.
Thank you, Mel.
Thank you.
On that note, a question, since I know you're privy to conversations with people directly, like, 1 degree separation from Trump on frequent. So I know that Pete Hegseth, has some very strange Christian Zionist proclivities and has given some disturbing speeches in Israel calling for the reconstruction of Solomon's temple. He's got the whole Kingdom of Jerusalem tattoo. And then you got, a bunch of these people with a very strange worldview and a belief in greater Israel as this sort of restored new Babylon, like the UN ambassador, who I think did get accepted, who gave testimony that she believes Israel has the right to, all of Gaza, West Bank, and beyond. And there does seem to be a rump. Like, I'm very happy that there was this ceasefire. Hopefully it doesn't get sabotaged, but it's on super shaky ground. But what do you think of? Do you think that, in what degree do you think Trump is influenced by these creatures like Mark Rubio, who arranged also a NATO of the Pacific, a Quad meeting this week, around the threats of China and North Korea and Russia in the Pacific? So do you think that he's got an ability that he's allowing these people in order to just sort of appease, like he did with Bolton in the first term, that he's appeasing certain institutions, but he's not himself at all swayed by the worldview? Or do you think that he's got problems on that front?
No, I don't think he's swayed by the worldview. I think his worldview is has been for 4 years, molded by him. And listen, he was not getting real information when he was in office the first term. I mean, the level of treason that people are yelling about Pompeo getting his security clearance revoked. They don't have any idea what Pompeo was doing then. During a lot of this time, a lot of these people were covering up crimes on the inside, just like the Warren Commission, and it's never stopped, over and over. I think that his choices are chosen for specific clearing out operations in these institutions. He's choosing people that will not be afraid to cut the workforce in certain areas and to restructure the bloated bureaucracy, and to, I mean, I'm a big fan of making lobbying illegal, especially from foreign countries. I really think that the USAID has to be audited for the last 30 years and find out not only where did the money go, but what was being done in our name that made people like the Clintons and other people filthy rich on while we were given propaganda. I think a lot of these people are about the cleanup job. They're not career politicians. I don't see them as that. I see them as people that said, I'll clean up this piece and I'll clean up this piece. And they've been working on it for many years, which is why I do feel, I want everyone to be their own judge, is what I hope. And we'll judge these people by their actions, but we have to, because we don't have a media anymore, we have an intelligence operation. It's going to be up to the people on this call, and the people that go out there all around the world and speak up, to stay skeptical, to stay on top of it, to say, this is not what we want. But frankly, I think the people chosen have specific missions to clean out the agencies they're going into, more than anything else.
Okay, so I hope you're right on that, because the slash and burn idea I see is value if you just like wind them up and have a hexeth go and just slash and cut and burn. Okay, all right, accept that. As far as the bureaucratic deep state institutions within the U.S. itself, okay, all right,
Yeah.
let's see what they do. Let's see what happens. All right, we got Matthew Thomas. Are you still there?
Yeah, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Awesome. Hi, Mel. Thanks for all your comments and the work that you do. I appreciate it. I'm looking forward to getting a copy of your book and taking a read. You made a couple of comments that I think were really provoking comments and questions, and I'd love to drill in on them a little bit more. This idea that America is a grand experiment, I completely agree, and it's an experiment that I don't think has reached has culminated yet in its final outcome. And you also made a couple of comments about culture and as well as liberty, concepts of liberty and freedom. From your travels and your discussions with people all over the country, how do we as Americans think of liberty, these concepts of liberty and freedom? I mean, every time I get into a conversation with someone about the concept of freedom, it's typically boils down to this idea of freedom from responsibility, which usually ultimately translates then into the freedom to choose your executioner, right? And I'm kind of curious as to how Americans nowadays think of this concept of freedom, and I'm hoping it's something that doesn't manifest itself, and it can typically manifest itself into a very kind of anti-government, anti-social responsibility, anti no sense of moral obligation to our fellow man, right? So that's kind of one question I'd like to put out there, not just for you, but anyone else wants to comment. And then also, as part of your travels and conversations, I'm very interested to figure out what is it that binds us together as Americans, because clearly it's not race. We're all different races. Clearly it's not religion. We're varying flavors of different religions. What, if anything, kind of binds us together as Americans, other than the accident of geography that we all happen to live on the same landmass? Did you see any kind of common threads, or I'm looking for any kind of connective tissue that would actually bind us together as Americans to perhaps at some point mount a second revolution?
Yeah, that's a great question. I love both of them very, very much. And these are the kind of things I asked people. First of all, what's very sad is what I found, and this is sad because every person born on this planet has the ability to think and to reason and to use critical thinking and to be skeptical. I mean, on different levels, but I believe everyone is endowed with the divine ability to think for themselves and make choices that are good for themselves. The way I see freedom is kind of similar to that there are fundamental things that are not negotiable, not negotiable to anyone that is born on planet Earth. And what I notice is that the vast majority of people I've spoken to cannot think anymore. I really believe that there is a level of that has been, and like I say in my book, has been pushed purposefully and very intensely by different people, from DARPA to NATO to things that evolved out of Nazi Germany. I think people are so cognitively being overtaxed that I think people, when you ask them, like, what is liberty or what is freedom, they can't even really think. And that's the sad part. I put the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, and the Declaration of Independence in full in the appendix of my book, because what I realized more than anything else is people don't know. They don't know. They've never taken the time to wonder. I think what still drives people to America is the promise of the original George Washington-led Constitution and the idea of America being what they envisioned, which I always say the best vision I've ever heard of for the United States is is in George Washington's farewell address. But we've strayed so far, but I think in everyone's hearts, not just here and all around the world, and don't forget all the European ancestry that came here, but many of the ancestry did not. And I think America has this kind of, I guess it goes back to Democracy in America and Tocqueville and that the idea when he came here to look at America and travel around and a lot of other people at that time, there was this promise of freedom. But it had this idea of it wouldn't be subject to the king, freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of this. And over these decades upon decades, it's become taken for granted to the point that nobody even thinks about, do we deserve better than we have right now? And if so, what do we deserve? And what is unacceptable, what's against the Constitution? I mean, anyone could go right now, probably look up their local city council's last few meetings and probably say, well, that's unconstitutional, we can't do that. But not enough people are doing that because they're not putting together the idea that A, they have the power, and B, that freedom isn't free. And we can't sit around and hope that the best funded politician, be it from, the left or the right machines that are basically billion-dollar lobbying firms, Republican and Democrat, are picking people for us. We don't even think, well, who aren't they picking? Nobody participates really in primaries in America. It's our duty for us to decide, but because we have been so demoralized, people don't see that as freedom. They don't see the responsibility of freedom as something they have to uphold, And also, I think COVID was a real eye opener and a divider, and people that understood and believed in liberty and freedom, and people that believed that what they're getting is good enough, and that somehow is freedom. So I think a lot of questions are happening, but the saddest part of it all is because of the censorship. Like, I was kicked off of YouTube in 2020, banned for life, never allowed back on, and still to this day I've never been allowed back on because I did 3 shows with Dr. Zelenko, and all the way in the beginning, way before the vaccine. So for me, the big people can't think by design. And the control of the narrative, as per Klaus Schwab's award-winning book, The Great Narrative. Just kidding. We have succumbed to the great narrative in America on a grand scale from the top down, and people do want to think now. I feel like people are very interested in history for the first time. I'm seeing it. But over the last 3 years, since I started in Manhattan in Times Square all the way back during the lockdowns, saying this, there's liberty here, there's individual sovereignty, but many people never thought about it. I do think that there's a movement towards defining it, but I think not enough people out there even look enough to say, do we still have liberty? Do we still have, what is exactly the more perfect union we're working towards? Is anyone defining that? So to me, I love what you're saying, and I just think we have to keep fostering and pushing through this censorship because people do want answers. I know most people want, the biggest question I get, which is why my speech at big events is called Who Are They? Who are they? And my new question is, who are you? I say to people all the time when I go to small towns, I say, look, I don't care if you know who your city council is. I want them to know your name. I want them to know, oh God, Mel's here again. We're going to have to actually be held accountable. That's how they should all feel. So people think that they are free right now. They don't know that they're being surveilled 24/7, whether they like it or not. And many of the other things, again, I always go back to the Patriot Act being the first bastion of the end of liberty. But I think we have a chance right now. We just all in our sphere of influence have to show up, speak up, stand up, and be the guy to say, what is liberty? Let's define it. And are we living in that? What is freedom? And for me, also, there's a big war on personal property. And I'm of the thinking that personal property is part of freedom and liberty. And that has been something that we've given up because that was the most disturbing thing for me driving around America, literally from New York to California and back on every route, was how many abandoned farms, how much land is owned by the federal government that doesn't really look like they're, I don't know what they're doing there, but you could be driving from New Mexico to Colorado and literally all of its so to me, there's a lot of things that are happening that I also fear for going forward if people don't fully understand their rights, what freedom is, what they have given to them in terms of freedom and liberty in our Constitution. That is still the law of the land, because I also see a lot of land grabs coming up. You're not free if the government knocks on your door and says, I'm taking your land. That was that was part of the Declaration of Independence, I think. You're not free if they kick in your door and they're looking for a crime. There's things that are happening that are antithetical to the Constitution, Bill of Rights in America, and that people still are allowing it to happen to them for fear of being censored, canceled, arrested, whatever else. But not everyone, and a lot of people are standing up. But I think right now our biggest problem is that people aren't able to think at all by design.
Yeah. Yeah. On that note of, I love all of those points so much. And I was struck when I think it was end of 2008, found myself in a study group in a university in LA. And there was like maybe 20 students and me as a Canadian. And part of it involved a little lecture and a reading of the Declaration of Independence that my friend had organized, and I was a part of it. And the majority of the students, who are all political science students who were there in the study group, admitted afterwards that they hadn't read the full declaration. They were shocked and moved. And in my mind, as well, like a Canadian, I can kind of understand it from a certain level. Like, we're brainwashed by a British education system. I had thought that, if you'd asked me before I got political what the American Revolution was about, I would have said it was about a tea party and not paying taxes, and and that's not that different ultimately from where a lot of Americans have been brought intellectually, and they haven't read those 25. You pointed out 25 grievances inside baked into the Declaration of Independence. And I mean, the taxation without representation is like what, 0.17 or something?
Right.
It wasn't
27 even. I mean, but honestly, if you read them right now today, you're going to say we're exactly the same place.
Yeah, exactly. That was exactly, but yeah, that's what I was getting at. It's like it would give you such a good sense of what exactly is the diagnostic of today's world and what to do about it by really evaluating, as you said, the firsthand reports of people who lived it, were thinking about it. Read the Federalist Papers, and if people actually read the original writings, they would have a much better sense of how to actually engage and recognize that their freedoms come with these responsibilities, and we should have a freedom to go and engage in every chance we get in town halls and primaries and you name it. Like that, what a privilege that is compared to the thousands of years of human civilization, which had the freedom to shut the hell up and stay on the plantation and stay illiterate. Great points, Mel. Fantastic. We got Kelly. Kelly next. You still there, Kelly?
I'm here. You hear me?
Yeah, sure.
Hi, Mel.
Hi.
I've been a longtime follower you for quite a while now. It's a pleasure that you come on to talk to us.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
I'm here in Canada, Southern Ontario, and we don't have a Bill of Rights or anything like that. A lot of people in Canada don't even, you talk about, what's wrong with their country. A lot of people don't really seem to have an opinion, at least in my neighborhood. And when we had that COVID, we had this trucker convoy. I really noticed a difference. A lot of people came together. The first time in my lifetime, I really seen something different. But then, all that blew over. The Ukraine war started just after this convoy trucker thing. And it's almost like everyone forgot. They had an inquiry, and that didn't seem to do anything. And now we're just back. We're having an election probably very soon. And I guess my question is, as a Canadian, what can I do to help make Canada great again?
I think Matt's probably a better person to answer, but I do have a lot of Canadian followers that comment a lot. I put some things on hold because I'm getting a new production team up and running, but it is weird that so many people in Canada seem to not equate what is happening here with what already I think happened there. And frankly, like here, if people aren't suffering to a level of action, or I think that it's also a very grand demoralization, dehumanization, kind of Bezmenov thing that has happened in Canada. Because what's crazy is that from New York, watching, because a lot of people didn't even know what was going on in Canada, but watching Canada during the lockdowns and then Freeland seizing the money from the World Economic Forum, people were like, wait a minute, what happened to Canada? I think everyone always thought Canada kind of flew on autopilot. But what's scary is I think a lot of Canadians that support, which is baffling to me, Trudeau or Freeland, are also like that. I think it's the same thing that is plaguing America is the inability to think of their own best interests or the best interests for their family and their children and their future in a way that is productive and drives them into action. It does seem that there's kind of like, okay, somebody's going to fix it, but it's not going to be me, or even worse, which is what I see most of the time when I go out, is there's nothing I can do. So I have my house, I have my stuff, so I'm just going to ignore it. And I think that that's even bigger. And the censorship and the silencing and everything that is going on in Canada is far worse than even here. So, I mean, people are getting what they're getting, but the idea that Trudeau is still in any way, shape, or form in power there is truly shocking. And we'll see what happens upcoming. But I saw Freeland looks like she wants to run the country, and it looks like people don't fully understand that she already sold out Canada 10 times over. So it's going to be up to people like you to talk in your local community about the fundamental rights of human beings on planet Earth that are being circumvented by a government that is not fully invested in the people of Canada. And I feel like we're in a very similar place. It's just you guys have such a smaller population that we could see real change before our eyes in Canada if Canadians got together and saw this and exposed it and forged a better way forward because of the scope. So, I mean, I do think Canada's waking up, but that's more for Matt Arrett, since he knows the whole deep details.
Yeah, we might have a future presentation just on that question.
Good.
So we'll
I'd
leave
love to know more.
Okay, well, we'll leave that hover and float out there for a bit. But I think definitely the entire conversation about, the extension of the U.S. to make Canada the 51st state, whether or not that's just provocative words or trolling or whether there's something behind it, I think it's at least forced the conversation about what the hell is Canada in the first place, which is otherwise something that most people took for granted, and they weren't posing the question, which is part of why this deep state structure has been permitted to exercise this absurd influence over our lives in Canada for so many generations. So that's a healthy thing. But yeah, we'll do a whole class on that in the future. So, okay, we'll put that on pause. That next person up on the list is Richard Moore. And before, Richard, you ask your question, Mel, how long do you have? Do you have to do you have a hard stop at some point? Or?
Let me see. I have another half hour.
Okay, good to know.
So,
all right, that'll help me pace things a bit.
Great.
Richard, go for it.
Okay. Hi, Mel. I wanted to comment on your proposal to have local groups. I think you called them freedom cells or something. So back in the late 90s and early 2000s, I worked with a number of activists up in Vancouver, Victoria area on something, we called it community awakening, community empowerment.
Yeah.
And the idea was to get together small groups. We thought of them as representative microcosms,
Yeah.
And if they could come up with a sense of the community among themselves, if it was a randomly chosen group, then it would resonate, hopefully, with the community. And we found that the kind of processes used are absolutely essential to success, because you can have just a conversation where people throw ideas around, or you can have a creative awakening where the people in the group start working together and creating things rather than just like voting on alternatives, so to speak.
Right.
And we were actually quite successful.
Wow,
We had
great.
very successful groups with very creative outcomes. But the problem we had is that there'd be an article in the paper the next day talking about it, right? But then the next day was the next news item. There was no catching on, because back then we didn't have all the crises and divisiveness and censorship. It was more of easy times.
Yeah.
So those kinds of approaches might work better now.
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
So
I mean,
I just
yours
want
is-
to emphasize the importance of process if you're talking about community groups. Thank you.
Great. I would love to talk to you more off of here, because that is what I think is needs to be done. But like you said, these aren't community groups to just go back and forth. I would say, the way I lay it out in my book, is that people have different responsibilities. So people should be watching what are the no bid contracts that have gone into our community that the city can't. People should have we should be the oversight group. We should be the committee oversight of our local government. We should be the ones that are keeping an eye on developments. They all have websites now. They have to be out there. But, different people can do different things. Like, I think it's important to bring back art, culture, theater, all of these things to towns and cities and everywhere all over that are serving the community. I also think that we need new local banks that are committed to working with our community groups to help fund and sponsor stuff. I think we need a lot of things like that. And if divided, and I go back to my Americans Anonymous, back to the original, which would be Bill W. in the 30s of AA, I still go back to, it would also have to be a bunch of people that want to remain anonymous, that there is no press, and it's very difficult. I'm not saying it's not, but we got to figure out how to do that, because what we want is not to have external influence, like in meetings. The whole point of AA, which is why my book's Mel K and Bill W. and Matt E. The reason for that is so that people can speak freely without retaliation or without attacks from the outside, which is very important. But also self-sustaining, self-sufficient, and, all kinds of things could go in there. There could be people that organize different barter groups around the community. There could be people that, keep an eye on what the sheriff has in plan for the next emergency, because if we're not watching that, a lot of it doesn't even get done. And then things happen and we say, how did that happen? Or a group of people that all they do is watch new surveillance and violations of privacy that are happening around in the guise of keeping us safe, or climate change or whatever. So I love what you're talking about, and that is exactly what I would love for people to do on their own, to self-organize around not parties or politics, but around concepts of freedom and privacy and controlling your own community by the government works for you, and acting like that by being a community oversight board, or, it's Derek Bros that says Freedom Cells. I say Americans Anonymous meetings. But, and again, people forget that a big part of COVID and a big part of totalitarianism, as per Origins of Totalitarianism, who I lean on Arendt a lot, is isolation and loneliness. So reinvesting in community events and outreach and all of that. It's just, I really think saving America is a local job, and in every locality. So I really love what you did. Thanks for sharing that. I'd love to hear more.
Thank you.
Elisa.
Hello, I just want to say, Mel, I listen to most of your podcasts, so
Thanks.
so I'm a big fan of it. I'll let you one thing. That I live in British Columbia, Vancouver, and one thing that's happening at my church is that we go to church in the morning, and then at 12:30 p.m. we take over the food court at the local shopping center. And it took me a couple of churches to find one where people know what's going on. So people at the church I'm going to know what's going on, and it's not taboo to talk about it. One of the problems with churches in Canada is that the Trudeau Liberals made the church tax exemption status based on you have to talk about things compatible with what the government is saying, which is totally against the Canadian Charter of Rights. But apparently I read deeper, and that goes actually back to Bill Clinton. So nothing in Canada has been hatched in Canada. It's been hatched somewhere else. Anyways, I wanted to just interject something that's a little bit light and fun, because I do think God does have a sense of humor. And in the last 2 years since I've been doing a 180 on Trump, this song has been in my head. I've sung the Handel's Messiah every year since I was 16 years old. So this aria is written for the baritone, so it's going to be a little off because I'm a soprano, but just because I feel like we have to interject a little bit of lightness and a sense of humor, because I think laughter conquers more things than anger and getting mad does. So if we laugh in their faces, that's the thing the devil cannot stand. Like anger, like even if it's righteous, it actually feeds it. The devil cannot stand being mocked. So here we go. The trumpet shall sound, and the dead shall be raised. The dead shall be raised incorruptible. The trumpet shall sound, and the dead shall be raised incorruptible. Be raised incorruptible. Now listen to the words. I'm going to jump ahead to the next section. And when you listen to this later today, ask for the extended version of this aria when you search The Trumpet Shall Sound, because most performances, they don't do the whole thing. So, but the end is... So I actually think that's about Donald Trump, and it's totally hilarious and funny, but I think that is God. I think that's exactly God. And we have to we need to bring real humor, and not just the kill Tony, everything's perverse humor, but real humor that's uplifting. For this corruptible must burn on in corruption. For this corruptible must burn on, must burn on. And it goes on and on. But have a listen to that later in the day.
I will.
Because the words
Awesome.
are like totally like, oh, this is about Donald Trump. The trumpet shall sound and the dead shall be raised. And I feel like that's happened to me in the last 4 years. So anyway.
Cool. Great. Thank you. Appreciate
I just always
that.
have some fun. We can't always just be.
I agree. Good. Great. Cool.
Yeah, Elisa, that was super nonlinear. I didn't expect that. Thank you. Do you actually arrange your like a chorus that goes out and performs this sort of thing publicly?
Well, I've been in choir since I was 6 years old. I mean, choir has just been a kind of a lifeblood part of my life. And I've been a bit isolated from the music arts groups that I have been involved with. I've been a member of the Vancouver Bach Choir for 30 years. It's the symphonic choir in Vancouver, longest running. We were the backup singers for the Pavarotti three tenors when they came to Vancouver when they were alive. So I've been in symphony choir for a long time, but everything in Canada, all of the arts group have been co-opted by this thing. And even though I love the music, they're still performing the music. I can't be around some of the people because, like, I went to go and see the Messiah like I do every Christmas. And then I chatted with the woman sitting next to me, and like, we just heard the Handel's Messiah. I'm in tears being moved by the words because I feel like every word from that oratorio is being actually fulfilled now. I've heard those words forever, but I feel like, oh, that's what that was about. And I've been singing this for a long time. And the woman next to me is like, oh yeah, that's all bullshit and Christians are all fascists. And I'm like, what is wrong with you? like you've got the truth here. And I know it's not really about other religions. This is the poison of academia. She's an academic. The trouble is, I think she's a sister of the conductor of the choir that I've been a part of for a long time. So I just can't. So I've been working privately with my opera coach. My opera coach lives in New York. one of the big things I need help with, and this is maybe a group effort, is figuring out how to talk to people. Because now I've read 8 of Matthew's books. I read Cynthia's book. I've read all these things, but even just trying to figure out how to speak to people, and then at what stage to speak to people. Like when I was growing up, we did Christian evangelism, and you can't sling the whole enchilada at people, even if they're well-meaning people, because people just can't take in that level. So the question is like, today, this person, what piece do I give them? It's like, there's an old proverb, put a pebble in someone's shoe. It's that kind of idea of evangelism. Don't give them the whole thing. What's the pebble you put in someone's shoe? And you let them walk around with that for a bit, and the pebble becomes more like gnawing at them for a while. So it's more like trying to figure out how to speak. And I've had to pull back because like all this information is like drinking from a fire hose. So like I look emotionally unstable to the people around me, even though I think I'm on the right path. But if I try to talk, it too much comes out at once.
Yeah, I want you to know, I'm in Americans Anonymous. There's a lot of things like exercises about that have nothing to do with really as much America as have to do with examining different things you think. But we have exercises in there about neurolinguistic programming and different techniques that have worked over time. Much of them taken from PTSD, A Time to Heal, which is Kathy's book. But a lot of things in there also about approaching people with questions rather than with information, and how to break through kind of. And I agree with you. I'm actually doing a project with Roseanne and Jim Brewer, because we believe comedy will have to be the last bastion of breaking open the people still in the matrix. But I do want to say that we have multiple exercises, including actual hand pen to paper exercises, to kind of define like not only what you're most passionate about, but what and how to approach it, and how to approach it with other people. Because a lot of the book, especially the third part, is about kind of what I call the language of letting go of those you can no longer allow to make your life toxic. So there's a whole section basically about letting go of the past, including the people, whether you love them or not, being at peace with being okay with letting them go in love, not forever, but if it's getting in the way of you making your life better and helping the people around you because you're trying so hard to convince somebody, then you're trying too hard. And that sometimes you have to say, I'll revisit this relationship, but maybe this one over here can be repaired. Because I think a big part of the psychological operation during the pandemic was to shatter relationships between families and friends and support systems. You know, in America, not only did they shut down our schools, but they shut down all opportunity for the 26 million people in America estimated that go to a recovery meeting every day was stopped right away too. And church was stopped and everything was stopped. And that shift in pattern, a lot of people that I've talked to, a lot of psychologists, psychiatrists that I actually still believe are for good, define this kind of shifting of people's patterns that they were living in as reframing what they believed and who they were, but that it would be a long process, but that this big, just overnight kind of invading people's usual patterns started different people thinking differently, and you kind of have to wait for people to get to where they are.
Yeah. One thing I'm trying to work on, and I like this is like something I have to kind of take back to my studio and workshop for a bit, is trying to work on songs and stuff, like bringing back the parlor song, like from the 18th century. Because when William Wilberforce was in the abolitionist movement, all of those kind of evening parties that they would go to, somebody could sing a song, and that song could speak to a room full of people swilling their champagne and that sort of a thing. And I think having light art, like singing a song that I can either sing a cappella or with very light instrumentation, which means that you can crash You can crash an event, and it doesn't have to just be people shouting. Like the people shouting, yeah, that's one stage, but you need something that's a crash that's more like flypaper. It's more sweet. So if you sing a song that the people around go, "Oh, I love that song," they want to join your cool song rather than shouting, "Get out of the room!" You know, you're yelling.
Yeah.
I'm trying to figure out what that is. So
And
that's what I'm trying to work on.
that's a good no, that's a good project, Elisa. That's a good thought. And I would just share I was a volunteer for about a decade with the Schiller Institute, and that's the thing I probably missed the most, that I thought was one of the most effective qualities of that experience, was this oral culture of doing these both high pieces, like we would perform Bach's Jesu meine Freude within a political fight. So a political process. We go to Congress and we'd have like choruses break up and actually perform the Jesu meine Freude or Mozart's Requiem, but also we had these like satirical pieces too, like these canons that were often really easy to learn and would just be able to like intervene with a little bit of a punch that was hard to forget if it was done well. Like there was this one went like Al Gore will kill you, not CO2. Al Gore will kill Nazi,
Did ever
not CO2. And then it would just loop again with like several voices. And it was just fantastic. But all that to say, I think your project is a really good one. And that would offer vitality. And when you look at a lot of the freedom movements that were successful, whether the Irish resistance movement or the civil rights movement around Martin Luther King Jr., or anyone, there's always this quality of the cultural edification of the people who needed to find the courage and the sublimity to be able to
Mhm.
like stand up to tyranny with and that beauty that which was so vital to make that secret sauce kind of function and to keep people strong was through music and folk music especially. So yeah, I think you're onto something really good, and you should keep on working on that and then
Did
feed back into
everybody?
teaching us what the hell you learned along the way.
Yeah. What did everybody hear the Carmageddon song from IMA that came out a month ago or 3 weeks
Yeah,
ago?
I
So
didn't.
I don't know if
Mel
she's
seems
real or
to.
fake, but I don't know. The song is interesting.
Okay. We'll do a whole musical, I think, symposium at some point too. But that's good. All right, we got time for hopefully three or four more questions. So I got Ken, Jerry, and David, who have been on the list waiting for a while. So Ken, if you're still there, where are you?
I am indeed, and I want to say to Mel that I do remember the work that you and the Stu crew did with Dr. Zelenko, and I want to thank you personally for that. That was such critical information at the time that I'll never forget that.
Thank
Uh,
you.
I don't want to digress too far here, but something Matt said is something that I feel I need to respond to. He said that he hopes the ceasefire will hold in Palestine. I shared that hope until a few days ago when the reports started coming in from Jenin. I put in the chat a link to today's Doctors Against Genocide update, where you can hear doctors live on the ground in Jenin explaining that things in Jenin are just as bad as they were in Gaza before the ceasefire. There's no difference, except that I don't believe there's aerial bombardment. But other than that, things are pretty much exactly the same. So we shouldn't delude ourselves. I think the idea of a ceasefire is it's a feather in Trump's cap, but unless he's willing to enforce it Palestine wide, I don't think we should give him any credit for it. And we have to remember that Miriam Adelson gave him $100 million in the quid pro quo is supposed to be the annexation of the West Bank. So that's where I think we need to keep our eyes. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Jerry, you're up. You're up to bat, Jerry.
Okay, thanks. Thanks very much, Mel. Your presentation is like a breath of fresh air for us Canadians up here. And I wanted to ask you, I wanted to pick your brain about this idea of the presidential pardons, because I'm kind of a mixed opinion on this thing. On the one hand, I watch Biden do all these pardons, and it's almost like he's creating a class that's above the law, you know? And then on the other hand, I see Trump with some of these pardons, And it's almost like he's saying the justice system is so bad that this is the only way some of these people will get justice, because maybe they can't afford to fight this thing. So now I'm asking this because if and when Canada does become the 51st state, I need to know all this stuff.
I get it. Well, the first thing is that people are very upset about, on a massive scale, about the pardons that Biden gave his family, but they only go back to 2014. But I have a copy of Hunter Biden's laptop, every single page printed out, all of that. There was tremendous, okay, what they've been lying to everyone about is that many things straight through the entire Obama administration when Joe Biden was vice president all the way to date have happened that put America's security at risk for financial gain for the Biden family, but not just the Biden family. In that laptop, the actual book Marco Polo put online is everything from that laptop. They were undermining governments all over the world. What was going on was so egregious. And then also a pardon in America without defining the crime. I think one of the biggest criminals in my government is Adam Schiff, who's sitting there acting like, I don't know if I want it. Well, I would say he should definitely take it because his crimes go way back and way before most people know. Most of the California politicians are completely compromised. As for the January 6th pardons, it has always been my belief that that was a setup, that it was a Fedsurrection set up to cover up what did happen on Election Day, and more importantly, to give Nancy Pelosi, Mitch McConnell, Pence, and others the ability to call off the people that were going to challenge the electors right in time for what happened. So to me, the entire premise of January 6th is a fraud. There's a saying in the courts here, fraud vitiates everything. And frankly, there were some people that were violent, but many people that were violent were not arrested. And it is the belief that they were undercover people that were being funded and paid for. So until we get to the bottom of what actually the government did, and especially the District of Columbia, to facilitate what I believe to be similar to a Reichstag fire, none of those cases were, and the judiciary in the District of Columbia, which is a vassal state that I fully believe does not function in any way, shape, or form in any relation to the Constitution. The judiciary in Washington, D.C. is a disaster, and it is a far left weaponized disaster all the way back. Because for me now, I can't not look back and think that both Bushes, Clinton, Obama, and Biden are all in on the controlled demolition of America, which the most important thing was to destroy the concept of law and order and justice, which they did beautifully, especially Holder really kicked it to the next level. But the malicious prosecution and then the fraud inside the court of saying things like 5 police officers were killed while sentencing people that didn't even walk into the Capitol and giving them multiple years for misdemeanors. And then in juxtaposition with what happened during, and I lived in New York City, during the Black Lives Matter riots and the burning and the beatings and the nonsense then, and nobody getting arrested. In fact, the government funding their way out. It's so fundamentally flawed, the entire January 6th from beginning to end, that these people could not possibly have gotten fair trials. And then again, the January 6th committee, I believe to be fully complicit in setting up January 6th. So again, it goes back to accountability. And if there will ever be accountability, if any of the January 6th people do reoffend, they will know that. But until the pardon, they were all on lists as domestic terrorists for the rest of their lives, because they stood outside on January 6th, the majority of people. And that should never happen. And the left, which is really, I believe, globalist funded, oligarch fueled color revolutionaries over there, they cheered on grandparents and children and families being torn apart over people that showed up that day and did nothing. literally nothing wrong. So just to me, when it comes to the pardons for January 6th, I just believe that the entire situation on January 6th is fraudulently being positioned, and that the judges in DC either believe what they're being told by the Biden people that were involved in the CIA and FBI and whoever, or they're in on the unconstitutional punishment of hundreds of people that did not commit a crime on that day. And either way, you can't really sort through the cases and say this person did something when they're denying that there was probably 300 to 400 people paid by Antifa and other groups inside the mix there that have not been arrested or defined or admitted to. So I think it's very different. I think the judicial system violated the civil rights of every single person involved on January 6th, and it has to be looked at before any of them are before any of this goes forward. It's a total, it goes back again to me to Bezmenov in the 80s. January 6th was a demoralization, dehumanization, normalization project of the deep state of America to keep us divided in the worst way, and to throw innocent people who didn't do anything wrong and certainly didn't know that they were, and certainly had no intent to the wolves, destroy their lives. I mean, these people, they're bankrupt now. They can't work. They're on a list as terrorists, not domestic terrorists, terrorists in America. And around the world. Many of them can't get jobs now. And why? What was this about? So I am all for the pardons for January 6th. And once we find out exactly what Nancy Pelosi and Muriel Bowser and Jamie Raskin and Kevin, McCarthy and all of them knew, and when they knew it and who was involved, the pipe bomb is especially telling. But I would just keep an eye. I think Darren Beattie on Revolver News does the best work on January 6th, but we are at some point going to find out, in my opinion, that was 100% set up, and probably Mark Milley will be in that mix too. But that's how I feel about that. I just feel like there's no way to have anyone had a fair trial on January 6th because the truth was so obscured.
Yeah, thank you. On that note, a good friend and another podcast host, Johnny Q, who's got a America Rising Radio media, is here listening, and I think he'd like to share a thought or two on this important topic. He was covering it on the ground live from the very get-go. So, Johnny, are you still there?
Yeah, I'm still here. Mel, thank you. You pretty much said what I was going to bring up. You brought up Darren Beattie, and I would double down on exactly everything that Mel said, because she really nailed it with J6. One of my best friends actually just got out of prison in Memphis, MCI. It's a gross violation of civil liberties. It's pretty unconscionable. Not everyone's been released. Mostly everybody has, but this goes back to something that started in the 80s, and Beattie talked about this. I did a thread on it a while back. Matt, I think I told you about it. It was called Operation PatCon. It started with the FBI basically intruding in, quote, 3%er groups, veterans movements, what they deem militias, so on and so forth. And that just basically turned into a wildfire of operations that stemmed out after that. So I kind of feel like January 6th has a lot of undertones about that. And other than that, I pretty much totally agree with what Mel just said. And thank you for bringing that to light. That's 1,000% agree with you.
Yeah, thank you so much for adding that. And, this goes all the way back. I did a great show with Chris Emery on Oklahoma City and digging into what you're talking about from that time. I mean, it was rampant. The CIA and other people, FBI, infiltrating groups and then being the instigators to crimes that those groups committed. I mean, all roads in my mind still to this day lead back to the awful Weather Underground folks that created Obama in Chicago. And I think that they're also the main infiltrators, those people and their tentacles and their network of these kind of shattering kind of events. But where the line is, I'm not sure. But I do know that January 6th cannot go uninvestigated, because we can never imagine what some of these people went through in jail. Also, all the people thrown in jail for my friend Beverlyn for praying in front of of abortion clinics,
Abortion clinics, yeah.
with the FACE Act treated. They are all being called terrorists. People have to understand the Patriot Act was so manipulated over these years.
Oh yeah.
That these people are going. Enrique Tarrio is going to be on with me this week. He was treated like Osama bin Laden for the last year, 2 years. I mean, and he wasn't even in DC on January 6th at all. And he's not a white supremacist. He's not white. He was treated, the way he was treated is so egregious. Literally, like all of those guys, Stuart Rhodes, everyone that got sedition and treason, which is a joke, were treated worse than, and I don't want to, we'll find out someday, but if that alone is enough to say, you know what, let everyone out and let's sort through what really happened that day. So I really appreciate you, Johnny, backing that up.
Thank you, Mel.
Thanks.
All right, let's try to squeeze in two more and then we'll round it out. David, if you're there, I know you had a question on organizing young folk. Always thought,
Hi, yeah, sorry, I'm just on my phone. Hey, Mel, thanks for the great presentation.
Thank you.
I just wanted your thoughts. How are you thinking about, there's the Gen Z generation, these young folks. I mean, they're pretty interesting, right? They're maybe you could say disenchanted, or they never were enchanted, so they don't kind of subscribe to a lot of the bullshit, I think is a fair way to put it. And so they're right, and we've seen things with TikTok, right, which is like a double-edged sword, but it clearly, I guess the way ideas get out there, things spread, and it was clearly deemed a problem that young people were being exposed to certain things in the way that they were. And so anyways, I just wanted you to maybe get your thoughts on how to reach these younger generations, right? Like obviously there's a meme war, there's meme magic, and they respond to different things, right? Like I don't know that they're gonna respond to 18th century parlor songs the same way, though they might. I don't want to discount that, but any thoughts on reaching them young folks?
Yeah, I have a section in my book too about that, which is we have to encourage and sponsor and help get these people together in groups. I think it's still the same concept, just in a different form. But I think that they're a lot more awake than maybe we're being led to believe. I have a son that's in college and he's 20 and in North Carolina. And I'll tell you what, all of his friends are pretty much asking the questions we would hope they would ask. I think the pandemic, as I call it, shifted people a lot, and some people are just starting to come around. But again, I think that this still goes back to local community groups, meetings. I see Ian Carroll and other people, they're doing like events at like local saloons, which are, that thing, or they're doing smaller events. I think it's about bringing everyone that's like-minded under the same tent to discuss the concepts that we're trying to protect and the true history of America. What's very sad is that not just earlier, but certainly during Obama, when he made the deal with Macmillan and for $300 million to rewrite all of our K through 12 textbooks, basically on history, is also something we have to pay attention to. My parents are in their 80s. They're part of a grandparents group that goes through local school books and then turns them in to say, like, this isn't true. That's not like this didn't happen. This should be taught, certainly things like the Declaration of Independence, all that. And but I think we also really have to pay attention to the education aspects. And of course, if you are a grandparent or a neighbor or a aunt or uncle or whatever to anyone that seems to be interested, I know there's a lot of people. My niece is at college. She's part of Turning Point. But there's a lot of different ways to do that. I just think that we got to get people away from their screens and into events in person. I know Matt and I have been invited to a couple different things. There was one in Nashville that it was music, art, and also, talking about some of the things we talked about today, and talking about, the global situation and ending the wars. Like, there's a lot more of that. I would like to see a lot more festivals happening of like-minded folks that are getting together in many different ways. And I think we just need to encourage our local communities to set up events that are welcoming and open, but also pro freedom, pro America, pro ending war. Like, just, I think we can revive a lot of the in-person stuff that we're being told by the globalist is over. Like, now I think a big part of January 6th was also to make sure that the American people never organized again, like the truckers or like January 6th. I think we have to go in the other direction and start organizing more and more locally. And I think that also includes encouraging young people to join, and then to create groups in their age group, and then once in a while all get together. But I do think that it's definitely a grassroots in-person push that needs to be made across the board for all ages.
Cool. Sue, you got the last question. Sue and Dave, or Dave. It might be Dave. You're on mute right now, so you got to take yourself off mute. Going once, going twice. All right. Next time. Mel, that was awesome. Thank you enormously for sharing your thoughts, your insights. I hope everybody buys your book. If they haven't already, the link is going to be in the description box of this video. Yeah, and just follow regularly your Rumble, like your show on Rumble. You guys are doing really great work. Thank you for being you. And
thank you.
We'll look forward to future chats.
Thank you.
Anytime. I'm really grateful. Everyone on this call is amazing, and I hope you will do what you can do in your local communities to bring people together in real life. I really think one of the things that can be most powerful and is the most disturbing to the globalist entities are having people talk to each other and respectfully find solutions themselves. So know that if every time that you're doing anything in that direction, you're walking towards freedom. And I think in everything we do, we have to ask ourselves, am I walking closer to freedom, or am I walking close to capture? And I just say, keep going towards freedom. Thank you so much, Matt.
That's a good litmus test. All right. Thank you, Mel. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.